Welcome to Coffee and Cybersecurity with CyberPilot. This is the first episode of our new podcast. I'm your host, Anders Bruder, and with me today I have Rasmus, who is the CEO here at CyberPilot. Maybe you will say hi.
Hi, everyone.
I've been joined by Rasmus today. In some of the next episodes, I'll be joined by other experts, but the reason we have Rasmus here today is because besides being the CEO here at CyberPilot, he's also been working as a consultant in a lot of companies where he's helped them with their security work. And today we want to talk about how to do a risk analysis. And that's because that's the foundation for a lot of your security work. So it's a good starting point when you are sitting with your security in your company. But maybe we should start with the basics, just who you are, Rasmus, if you want to put some words on it yourself.
Thank you very much, Anders. Well, I'm Rasmus. I'm the founder and CEO of CyberPilot. I actually come from a background of finance and international business, but kind of a few years ago, back in 15, 16, I realized that there was a huge potential for helping especially SMEs, small medium enterprises, with their cybersecurity. And the first step of that journey was really helping them as a consultant, okay, with their processes, their documentation, their policies. And then that expanded into kind of the company that CyberPilot is today, where we offer more services and kind of transition into a software as a service company.
Yes. And I think today we're not going to talk so much about what we do today, but maybe take a journey back where you did a lot of risk analysis, as I mentioned. So maybe we should just start with, what is that? What is a risk analysis?
Well, basically, when you want to start working with cybersecurity or information security, a lot of the frameworks out there and the best practices like ISO 27001 are really based around this risk-based approach.
Yeah.
So instead of having a predefined checklist of, well, you should implement all these things, you should implement a firewall, a anti-spam, encryption, etc. It's really about starting with looking at what could the potential problem be, what are the risks, therefore a risk analysis, and then you work from there, where you kind of prioritize your controls, your initiatives, based on your actual risks in your company or your organization. So it's a very good way to get the first idea about how you assess the risks in your company, in your organization, and then kind of work from there.
Yeah. So it is all about not just going with the best idea you come at first to secure your company, but actually map out what it is that you should work on based on what the consequences are and how likely it is to happen.
Exactly. It's kind of like, and I think there is a big tendency to really go towards the solutions very quickly. Like I see this new advanced firewall, and it can help me with advanced threats.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get tied up and you jump to the solution very quickly. Whereas our recommendation and kind of the general best practice is that you actually start, you take one step back, and then you look at, well, what is actually my risk? Try to assess that. And then based on that, then you might decide, well, that firewall is a good thing to implement. Or you might decide, well, that actually doesn't even fit the risks that we think we have.
Exactly. So I guess that's also answer why it's important to do one, because It is all about getting up in the helicopter and getting a good overview before starting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we've actually tried to map out like 4 steps on how you can do one, how you can get started. And before jumping into those steps, it might be worth mentioning that we also have a template that you can use to do these 4 steps. So we will drop a link in the description to the podcast where you can download the template, and then you can actually follow along pretty nicely what it is that we're talking about. Because we will use a lot of words that might be a bit hard to understand if you haven't worked with it before, but we'll try to keep it as low key as possible.
Yeah, and again, a thing to mention is that it is really a quite simple template, and it's a quite simple process that you can start with in a very, very simple manner. So it fits for all organizations, even if you are very, very small. but it's essentially the same approach. Even if you were a company like several thousand people, then you just need to involve more people.
Yes. Yeah, so it can seem a little bit big in the beginning, but it is pretty straightforward.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And I've written down that the first step is to create a scale for the risk analysis matrix.
Yes.
Maybe you can add a few words to that.
Well, kind of what is, again, kind of maybe answering first, what is actually a risk analysis and a risk assessment? It's where you try to evaluate, assess your risks on two different parameters, right? Two different dimensions. So first of all, what is the likelihood that a specific risk will occur? And then also, what is the consequence? If a certain risk should occur? And thereby you have these kind of this table. You have this matrix, your X and your Y, and then you obviously, then we recommend that you just keep it simple in the beginning. So just start saying, well, low, medium, high. So low consequence, medium consequence, high consequence, low likelihood, medium likelihood, high likelihood. And for that, you then get this matrix with 9 grids, and then you can place then going through the risk assessment, then you end up kind of placing the risks in those each of those 9 grids. Yeah. And then so as you mentioned, well, then you need to define a scale at first, because what is low, medium, high, and that's very dependent on how your organization looks like. So if you are like a very small company, then you might consider, if we start on the consequence side, you might consider a low risk, something that doesn't really have that much of an effect. Let's try to put that in numbers. Let's try to put that in costs. So you might say, for example, well, anything less than 10,000 kroner or 2,000 euros or whatever you want to kind of calculate. Let's put that in a low risk, because it's something that it sucks when it happens, but it's really it doesn't have any consequence to us kind of being a business and having being able to continue our operation. Then the medium, so low one is put the boundary on there that you think, well, it sucks, but it doesn't have any consequence. Then for your medium scale, try to figure out, well, what is actually a risk? What is an amount, a lost amount, an extra cost that would really be a pain in your organization? So it might be 100,000, something that say, well, if that happens, I'm really going to feel the heat. Someone in my organization is really going to be very, very mad, very disappointed. But again, it's not something that would put us out of business. It might put us out of business if it keeps happening again and again and again and again, but there's not one single kind of occurrence that can like, if we take on that cost, it's not going to put us out of business. And then the last, so that could be like 100,000, or if you're a very big company, that could be 10 million. So that's why it's important that you define that scale for yourself. And then the last part, well, where does the cost actually start being critical to your business? So that could be 1 million, it could be 10 million, it could be 100 million, depending on what the size of your company is. And again, it just makes it tangible to talk about when you have, because spoiler alert, you have to get someone else on board for this process, and it gives a kind of a shared view on, well, when we actually characterize risks, where do we put them?
So I guess it might not, well, I'm doing this assumption, so you can stop me if I'm not correct, but it might not be that important that the numbers are that precise. It's mostly also just keep like a scale that you can talk out from with your C-level or whoever is in this discussion.
Definitely. So we're never going to end up in a discussion. Well, is that actually if we set the boundary for our medium level risk at 1 million, is there? No, it's 900,000. Oh, I actually think it's 1.1. It's never in that range. No. But it's more to, if I just say low, medium, high to you, you're gonna have your assumption of what high, medium, low looks like for you. And that's where we need to kind of create a shared understanding of where do we think that risk is still something very, like, it's difficult to put a real number on, but at least it gives us the opportunity to talk about the same things.
Yes. So it's mostly about alignment as well when you do it.
And then, so that was for the consequence, and then for the likelihood, again, we need to consider, well, a high occurrence might be something that could happen like on a weekly, monthly level. Medium occurrence might be something that can happen like a quarterly or once a year, and a low occurrence might be something that happens maybe once a year or less. So again, just kind of defining that scale, so you have the same. When I say, well, I think there's a medium likelihood of that happening, you know basically what I'm referencing to.
Yes. And then when that's done, then you jump into the next part of the process. Yeah. Which I write down that is listing your assets.
Yes.
Maybe we can go to that.
Yes. Well, the kind of the best practice for doing a risk assessment is to either base it on your processes or your assets. And for me, I've always found that it makes it more tangible to talk about assets. So list all the assets that you actually have in your company. You could do it as a kind of an asset group. So you could say, well, we have like an accounting system. That's an asset. We have our clients, our PCs that we work with, our workstations. That's an asset.
Yes.
We might have our own servers. That's an asset. We might have a cloud account like with virtual servers. That's an asset. We have our employees. That's an asset. So all those assets you start you start listing up. So that you can then kind of talk about what are the risks per asset class or asset group.
Yes, and I guess it can be hard to list everything, but it's just doing the most you can, and maybe talk to other people, because it can be difficult to come up with yourself.
Exactly, like that, and again, that's why you need to. We will kind of have another episode another day on how you actually do that.
Yeah.
How you structure that, but again, the important part when you do risk assessments is to get input from across the organization, because you might think that you have an asset that actually has that doesn't have any like risk related to it, while if you are in IT, but maybe if you bring in someone from marketing, they say, well, it's actually really important that we also discuss the risk behind our website.
Yes, makes sense. So you actually need input from the whole company.
Yes.
Yeah. And then when you have all the assets with a small description and what department who owns it, so to speak, then you jump into listing all the threats and vulnerabilities and performed actions, which is the third step.
Yes. So let's try to find those. So a threat is basically what could happen to a specific asset.
Yeah.
And the vulnerability is what vulnerability is there that allowed that threat to be able to kind of materialize.
Yeah.
So
we could make an example with the employees, maybe.
Yeah. So the easy so a threat is that an employee clicks a phishing mail. That's kind of what the risk itself.
Yeah.
And then the vulnerability behind that. Well, what would the vulnerability be for that to actually materialize? That would be that the employees are not aware or not properly trained on how to spot phishing mails.
Yeah.
It could be like for your. It could be well. A threat could also be that my employees saves data in a wrong place. And what is the vulnerability behind that? Was that we lack guidelines around how employees should act.
Yes. So one asset could have many threats and vulnerabilities, actually.
Yeah. So the idea is that you go for each asset, you try to list all the potential threats. So what could basically happen to this asset that could be a threat, and then what are the vulnerabilities for that specific asset that could be there that would allow these threats to actually happen.
Yes. And then the performed actions part. What could that be? What is it?
The performed actions is what are the measures that we've already put in place to make sure that these threats and vulnerabilities are mitigated.
Yes.
So let's say we already have like a good guideline, a good policy, we have good awareness training. Well, that's an action that is already put in there.
Yeah.
Because that will then allow us to look at, well, we have this risk if we have this vulnerability, but we've already kind of put some things into motion that will reduce that risk.
Yes. So I think, again, this is a little bit like the scale. It will probably be difficult to list all threats because it also takes some kind of imagination to think of all the threats that could be out there. But doing this risk analysis gets more things on the table than not doing it.
Exactly. And again, it is a kind of it is a very subjective process. It's always about you as a company yourself, or you could obviously get help of kind of external from a consultant or things like that. That you go through the process and you assess your own risks.
Yes.
So it's not there's no right or wrong in this process. It's basically the assessment that you do for your specific company.
Yes. And I guess it's also not just a one-time thing, so you can always come back if you find new threats or new vulnerabilities, or if you have done some new performed actions to mitigate the risk.
Definitely, we can come back to that, but kind of when do you repeat that? I think that's a really good part to touch on as well.
But then you have all your threats and vulnerabilities. Then you actually move forward to the step 4 and the last step of the risk analysis itself. Then of course there's a lot of work afterwards. But that is to evaluate all the risks that you then come up with.
Yes.
Yes.
And so for that, it's again kind of it's taking, well, for my asset, what was the threats? So all the list of threats. If you have a big list of threats, you have a big list of vulnerabilities, and you only have a small list of what actions did I already put in place. Then when you start looking at the consequence, well, it's probably going to be, well, looking at all this, I'm probably going to have a quite high consequence, or a quite high likelihood of this happening. So consequence is probably more tied to the asset and what is in the asset and what kind of what is our processes around that asset, and the likelihood is probably more, well, how many measures do I actually have in place, but it could be both.
Yes. So this is also where it comes full circle, I guess. This is where you can actually map all the assets and threats and vulnerabilities onto the scale that you did in the beginning.
And that's kind of just, you do it one by one. You start with each asset, you put in your low, medium, high for consequence and likelihood. And then once you've done that for all your assets, you basically take that as a XY coordinate and you put it in your matrix.
Yes.
And then you can see, well, how do my risks then map out? How do my assets map out? And then it will be quite clear. It's actually quite of a very, it always kind of brings up this aha moment when you do it, because it then becomes very, very visual, saying, well, wow, this is actually where it's very clear that specific asset actually has a much higher risk than some of the others. And therefore it makes it very easy to kind of map out, well, where do we need to put in some more work?
Yes, and I guess that also goes with what you said in the beginning, that then you're not focusing on the solutions, but you could actually sit with a good solution, but then figure out now that it's low.
Exactly.
And then, okay, then I don't need to spend that time, even though I got a good solution.
Exactly.
But if you have one that is in high in both the probability and the consequence, then you got to get going.
Exactly. So again, it's about, I think for a lot of other processes, like if we do IT development, you always start, what is the problem? If you start with sales, you always think, well, what is the need? Yes. And it's basically the same for this process. Instead of looking at the solution, we always start kind of, what is the risk?
Yes.
Understanding that first.
Yes. Which I also think it just makes a lot of good sense in the end.
It's not, there's no kind of,
it's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science, exactly. It's definitely not rocket science. It's very clear, good kind of process.
Yeah. But then that's the whole risk analysis. But is there then anything that people should be aware of when they've done it or by doing it?
Well, I think it's about, first of all, it's about involving other people into it as well. That's where it really creates the good process. Instead of you in IT doing it yourself and it's kind of only being your subjective opinion about it, then it's a good process to do it kind of together in a group, So maybe it could be like you from IT, it could be someone from marketing, it could be someone from sales, it could be someone from the development team, it could be someone from finance, it could be like bring in the CEO, and then you have this like this good discussion across the group, because then you will also you get a much better alignment on what is actually the risks in our business. So I think that's one part of kind of structuring that. The other part is, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of when do we do this? Well, and I think there's two good answers to that. Once we do it at least continuously, so we do it on a predefined cadence, like once a year. I think that for most people, that most companies, that would make a lot of sense to do it once a year. But then it's also important that you actually use this risk assessment like actively when you think about doing new stuff. So if we think about let's change our IT provider.
Yeah.
Let's change where we how we do all our cloud servers. Well, that's a really good time to really then pick up your risk assessment and say, well, now we have a new asset, or we have a change in one of our assets. Let's just before we do this change, let's just at least just sit down for a minute and consider risk and do the assessment of the risk. Will this new setup, this new asset, this new kind of that we put into our daily work, will that have an effect on how we assess the risk?
Yeah. So always have a look at it and see what does it affect when we do new projects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I think that's about all for the risk analysis.
Yeah.
In the next episode, we will then start talking about how can you use it when you actually if you have this risk that is high, then how do you start a project and work with that? Do we have some frameworks we can use? And we do have like a thing that we think we can do without that. So
again, based on kind of just normal the best practice of how you work with information security.
Yes. So Rasmus will join me for the next episodes to talk about that. So we hope you will keep on listening, and remember to click subscribe if you don't want to miss another episode. And see you out there.
Thank you.